where we put our people, and then how we put them out for training. We're doing more and more training all the time, and making sure that they're aware of how to put a boom in the river, what the right angle is, so you're not allowing water to flow under it, but actually you are collecting the products. So there's a lot going into that, and it's something that we're very much factoring into our emergency response plans.
Matthew here, then Jonathan.
Good afternoon. Thanks to all presenters for your presentation. My question probably mostly to Jerome and James. And you talked, both of you, to different degrees about both the progress as well as some of the challenges associated with accessing and applying data sets from both the U.S. and Canada. I'm wondering if you care to comment on the top 1 or 2 data harmonization needs that you have in your work that would help you advance your research areas.
Okay. For the Great Lakes, I would say that the main limitations are, so I would talk about risk and just sensitivities here first. So if we talk about sensitivities, I would say that the socioeconomic features are probably the most challenging to describe. So that's an area that needs probably the most work. I think there is also a lot of work needed to have proper hydrodynamic models, flow circulation models that will help us understand if we do have an incident, where is it going? And that connects to also some water quality aspects, how much turbidity, how many particles do we have in the water, because that will define if the oil is going potentially to sink or float. So the fate and behavior in freshwater linked to the hydrodynamic circulation models, I would say, is a component that could gain a lot by more research.
That's okay. Thanks. Yeah, in terms of the most challenging data sets, there's actually some interesting connectivity issues with Canada and the U.S. I think it was mentioned in one of the earlier presentations about even just the NAICS systems that are used. But I didn't show one of the slides I had, but it's an aerial view of one of the bridges going from the U.S. to Canada, and then on the side of it is the GIS coded perspective of it, and they don't connect. So there's literally no connection along that route. So, and you don't find this out until you start running. It'd be like running a Google Maps from Toronto to Rochester, and you can't get over the bridge, right? And so then you can say, wait a minute, that's really weird. And you go in and you zoom in, and you're like, they're not connected. And you got to go into the GIS data systems, very labor intensive, and change the data in the system to make the connectivity. So there's some connectivity issues. The other thing that is something that would add value but would be really challenging is to start thinking how you take real-time data and bring it into these models. So when we run a model, we run a scenario, and there's a bunch of assumptions around that scenario. But to be able to take actual data that's being collected remotely in real time and bring it in. For example, traffic conditions, right? When we run a model and we're looking at land-based transportation, say in the trucking sector, we have to make certain assumptions about congestion. But we all know, right, that's changing all the time. So different ways to bring in real-time data and feed into these models would be helpful as well. And it kind of depends on the purpose.
I forgot one element that is very important to my heart, is that it's about the geographic scope of the question. We always forgot that these Great Lakes have an outflow, and depending on which map we take from which agency, you will see it ending somewhere close to the end of Lake Ontario. Sometimes it goes to Kingston, sometimes it goes to Cornwall. There are, a nice diversity of maps out there. The issues for oil are global, and we need really to set the proper scales and take the St. Lawrence as a whole.
John, you had a question?
Yeah, I do. I'm really still very interested in the social dimensions of some of this conversation. And Larson, I'm going to really put you on the spot here, so sorry for that. How would you start to think about, sort of analytically or conversationally, mapping out risk and social risk, how would you start to think about what the contours of that could look like? And I use mapping out both metaphorically and geographically, and really start to understand what that sort of consequentialist view would look like to various communities that are both linked to the Great Lakes directly, which would have a different consequence, from those that rely on pieces of it, which could be sort of economic, from those that have sort of existential value. How would you start to lay out the contours of that, the methodological?
Well, so I'm going to throw a disclaimer out there. This isn't what I do. But yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think, after Deepwater Horizon oil spill, there was some mapping done where they actually could identify hot spots of where risk was a little bit higher. And I think what they did with that was bring in, again, things like poverty, and again, those socioeconomic factors. So I think that would be part of it. I don't know how you would, I guess maybe depending on what industries are affected, you can tie that in as well. So that might be, maybe something we think about. I'm going to do some homework tonight and get back to you guys tomorrow. I don't know if, I see Doug has his hand up back there.
Yeah, there's been research on this issue going back to ExxonMobil these days about what makes certain communities more vulnerable than others. And ExxonMobil, for example, in Prince William Sound affected dozens of small communities, which had different social impacts and different recoveries. And there has been some academic research on what made them more vulnerable than others. Part of it has to do with the economic structure of the community in the first place. So in that sense, you can essentially predict, just like you can predict environmental sensitivity, you could predict social sensitivity using some of the same parameters.
Yeah. I'm trying to think about sort of the heterogeneity of risk, right? The geographic dispersion of risk. And I think the social dimension of the heterogeneity of risk, both geographically and metaphorically, I think are really important considerations. So starting to think about the contours, that starts to help me understand the underlying cultural events and how do I start to price that into the model, right? That as I'm thinking about risk and I'm thinking about risk coverage, how do I start to price in sort of a heterogeneous map of where risk is attributable to?
I would just like to add a Canadian perspective here to the cultural side. You mentioned culture, that is also, it is potentially included within this social metrics. And in Canada, for example, as the new government indicated, it would like to include, recognize indigenous cultures. This is a major effort that is being done, and I think it is one of the new era. We are now considering cultural, very strong cultural features into our decision making, and that is also the case for this type of questions.
Just very quickly, another dimension to add besides the geographic or spatial one is temporal. We haven't really talked about that, but long-term risks versus short-term risks, and how do you look at intergenerational risks, and then how do you discount those future generation risks to the present to make decisions? I mean, there's a lot of interesting work going on, and there aren't a lot of answers yet, but we're continuing to think about it.
I just have one other quick thing to add. When we were pulling together the agenda for this, we were kind of talking, and it's kind of funny because down in the Gulf, we think a lot about recovery. I think it's because we have so many spills that we're constantly recovering, and we don't think a lot about risk. But one thing that I would, on this topic, one thing that, you guys might want to think about is related to risk, how do you also recover? So what can you guys have in place where if something does happen, you understand really the needs of the communities and who might be affected so that you can really help those communities recover? So that might be something to really think about. And I think one of the slides that I had that really finding ways to kind of tie that into planning, that's something I think a lot of folks are struggling with, but something that you guys might want to think about.
Thank you, that's really great discussion. Unfortunately, we're gonna have to call it a day, but I really encourage you to, first of all, give a good round of applause to and if you need to leave discussion, we have the reception just across the hall, so feel free to join us for